November 13, 1942. 0148 hours. Iron Bottom Sound, Guadalcanal. The beam of a searchlight cut through the sweltering night air as Captain Tameichi Hara held tightly to the bridge railing aboard the destroyer Amatsukaze, his eyes fixed in horrified awe as American shells detonated nearby, erupting in bursts of steel and flame like a volcano. They are not targeting us. They are simply saturating the sky with metal. These lines he quickly wrote in his logbook that night would later symbolize a reality that would determine the fate of the Pacific War before most Japanese commanders comprehended it. Within the following 35 seconds, the USS San Francisco would unleash more 5-inch shells than some Japanese destroyers carried for an entire patrol. The Americans were not concerned with shell counts. They built barriers of fire that illuminated the night as though it were day, their guns glowing with heat from relentless firing. Just 2,700 meters away in Pearl Harbor, ships containing munitions were already being stocked, preparing 15,000 tons of shells sufficient to replenish the American fleet's battle usage 50 times over. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Navy logistics officers were debating if they could allocate 12 shells for each gun for the next supply mission. The computations of disaster were being recorded in spent shell casings and volatile powder, with production numbers that ridiculed every expectation the Imperial Navy had about waging war with the United States. Captain Hara would live through it, becoming the lone Japanese destroyer commander to serve from Pearl Harbor until the surrender, seeing firsthand a change that shattered not only vessels but the entire ideology of the Imperial Japanese Navy. That realization had started half a year prior, though scarcely anyone understood it. On May 7, 1942, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, Commander Teishi Nato, executive officer aboard carrier Shukaku, noticed something that left him profoundly perplexed. For 4 uninterrupted hours, American cruisers and destroyers kept up anti-aircraft barrages, showing no sign of stopping or rationing their ammo. According to later testimony given to interrogators, each U.S. destroyer seemed to possess more anti-aircraft shells than were available to our entire destroyer division put together. This assertion hardly seemed credible. Japanese naval doctrine, fine-tuned over decades, had operated on the belief that all navies faced similar ammunition limitations. The Type 9625 mm anti-aircraft gun, standard for Japan as a light-awe weapon, required strict adherence to engagement guidelines. Gunners were instructed to wait until enemy aircraft came within 800 meters before opening up. They were to fire controlled bursts of 3 to 5 shells. Firing stopped at once the plane left the optimum range. This wasn't because it was optimal from a tactical standpoint, but because the munitions supply wouldn't permit any other action. Lieutenant Commander Masatake Okumiya, serving aboard carrier Ryuho, drilled his crew rigorously on these doctrines. Each sailor understood their vessel's ammunition magazine could deliver precisely 12 minutes of sustained AA fire. Beyond that, they would be unable to defend themselves. Observing the Americans, Okumiya became increasingly anxious as he noted their gunners poured forth fire for untold hours. The true significance wouldn't reveal itself until the campaign for Guadalcanal, where the realities of mass industrial warfare would be made clear in blood and shattered ships on the sea. The Americans would come to call the area Iron Bottom Sound. February 27, 1942. The Java Sea battle should have resulted in an unequivocal Japanese win, and in narrow tactical terms, that was the case. Nevertheless, Captain Hara, at the helm of destroyer Amatsukaze, witnessed something that unsettled him more than any enemy's salvos. Combined U.S., British, Dutch, and Australian vessels under Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman unleashed 1,619 rounds of 8-inch shells during the clash, chalking up only 5 hits, 4 of which were duds. The Japanese side fired substantially fewer rounds, but theirs found critical marks. Still, Hara noted in his report after the battle something alarming. The Allied fleet maintained a ceaseless barrage, appearing unconcerned about how quickly their ammunition ran out, and their rate of fire alone would have emptied Japanese ammunition lockers within an hour. As Hara later recounted in a memoir published many years after, they fired as if their supply of shells had no end. Their poor marksmanship did nothing to offset the sheer abundance of ordnance, which made firing volume count more than accuracy. The Japanese forces secured a total victory. 2 Allied cruisers and 3 of their destroyers were sunk. Yet in the officers' wardroom later, Hara overheard a most troubling exchange. Lieutenant Yoshida, head of gunnery, was working out how much ammunition they'd spent. "Captain, 40% of our main gun ammo was used up," Yoshida estimated. Had hostilities lasted just 2 more hours, Hara shot him a silencing glance, but the numbers were unmistakable. Amatsukaze had gone into action with 2,000 rounds of 5-inch shells. In that one engagement, they expended 800. The wrecked Allied cruiser HMS Exeter, as described by survivors taken aboard, had fired more than 1,500 rounds from her 8-inch guns alone, a quantity surpassing the total ammunition carried by most Japanese heavy cruisers. August 7, 1942. The American landings on Guadalcanal brought the Japanese Navy's ammunition predicament starkly into focus. Vice Admiral Gonichi Mikawa's attack group racing down from Rabaul was equipped for only one nocturnal clash, not as a strategic decision, but simply because Rabaul's magazines could supply no more. The August 9 Battle of Savo Island seemed to confirm Japanese tactical prowess. Within 33 minutes, Mikawa's fleet destroyed 4 Allied heavy cruisers, taking the lives of 1,077 sailors. The Japanese incurred no ship losses. Yet hidden behind this brilliant action was a grim strategic disaster. Commander Toshikazu Omi, who served as Mikawa's operations officer, would later confess during American interrogation. "Our immediate withdrawal after the engagement was not prompted by fear of strikes from the air, as the Americans supposed, but because we had nearly depleted our ammunition. A follow-up fight was impossible. The U.S. transports, vulnerable and heavily laden with supplies, were left untouched since the Japanese quite literally lacked the rounds to fire at them." All told, Japanese gunners used 471 shells, scoring 10 hits for a hit rate of 2.1%, a level Tokyo would later condemn as extravagant. Meanwhile, at Pearl Harbor, Captain William Poco Smith watched over the loading of the ammunition ship USS Rainier. Its manifest listed for just one trip 5,000 tons of naval ordnance, including 350,000 shells of 5-inch, 1,200,000 shells of 40 mm, and 3 million shells of 20 mm caliber. This was an amount that would exceed all the rounds the Japanese combined fleet would fire in 3 months. The famous Tokyo Express destroyer runs to resupply Guadalcanal exposed the supply shortage in humiliating clarity. On November 30, 1942, Rear Admiral Raizo Tanaka led 8 destroyers on a new resupply journey. The manifests seized by the Allies revealed the scope: rice, 1,100 barrels, medical supplies, 200 barrels, ammunition, just 280 barrels. For some 15,000 embattled soldiers, they delivered under 300 barrels of ammunition. Each drum held about 300 rifle cartridges, or its equivalent in other munitions. The entire Japanese Guadalcanal contingent survived on supplies that a lone U.S. destroyer could burn through in a mere 20 minutes of battle. Captain Hara, in command of Amatsukaze during these runs, expressed bitterly, "We stake 8 destroyers, many lives, and a fortune in fuel to deliver what the Americans probably use up just shooting at practice targets." His observation was truer than he suspected. On that very day, USS Fletcher held a routine gunnery drill, going through 127 rounds of 5-inch shells, about half the content of one of Tanaka's treasure drums. The figures were staggering, well beyond the comprehension of Japanese strategists, who had based their war calculations on their modest production numbers. The Naval Ammunition Depot, located in Hastings, Nebraska, commenced operations in March 1943. Constructed across 48,000 acres of prairie land, the installation included 2,200 buildings and extended over 207 miles of railroad, employing a maximum of 10,000 workers at its production peak. This single plant was responsible for generating 40% of the U.S. Navy's wartime ammunition. In its initial month, Hastings produced a volume of naval ammunition exceeding the total output of all Japanese facilities combined for the remainder of 1943. The site chiefly manufactured 5-inch 38 caliber ammunition, which formed the foundation of American naval firepower. The factory's initial production speed was 100,000 rounds per month, increasing to 300,000 rounds per month by September 1943. Every round produced underwent inspection, testing, and shipment with a quality control method that discarded more ammunition than all Japanese factories together manufactured. At the same time, the Naval Ammunition Depot in Mallister, Oklahoma began operation. Its primary output was larger caliber shells and bombs intended for aircraft. By December 1943, its monthly output included 56-inch shells, 208-inch shells, 205-inch shells, as well as 500,000 pounds of aerial ordnance. The labor force at its height was 8,600 in 1945. Over in Japan, the Kure Naval Arsenal, recognized as the nation's leading ammunition factory, had difficulty reaching 10,000 shells of all sizes produced on a monthly basis. The Toyokawa Naval Arsenal, which had been greatly expanded in 1940 at tremendous expense, at its most productive managed to produce 35,000 machine guns and 4.5 million rounds per month, but this required employing 56,400 workers, among them 6,000 conscripted students between ages 12 and 16 working in hazardous conditions. On June 19, 1944, the Battle of the Philippine Sea offered the clearest example of the extreme ammunition imbalance experienced during the war. Vice Admiral Jizaburo Ozawa had brought together 9 carriers with a total of 473 aircraft, with hopes that this would be Japan's decisive confrontation. Facing him was Admiral Raymond Spruance, in command of 15 carriers and 956 aircraft. However, the greater advantage was his task force's access to nearly boundless ammunition, something Ozawa could not have envisioned. Lieutenant Sadamu Takahashi, piloting a Zero from the aircraft carrier Teiho, survived being shot down and later detailed his approach to the U.S. fleet. The air was filled with black explosions. These were not targeted shots, but an unbroken barrier of fire. They were not attempting to hit individuals, but were saturating the airspace with steel in every direction. The Americans displayed mechanical precision in firing. All 5-inch guns sustained a rate of 15 rounds a minute. Each 40mm battery delivered 120 rounds per minute. The 20mm guns discharged 450 rounds per minute. The destroyer USS Stockholm by itself released 12,000 rounds of 40mm and 20,000 rounds of 20mm ammunition over 6 hours of fighting. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's highest-scoring ace, noted from his Hellcat that the Japs flew into a curtain of fire. Our vessels weren't picking out single planes. They were producing lethal zones through which nothing could pass. The numbers were merciless. Japanese losses in aircraft numbered 476, encompassing those on carriers that sank. American plane losses reached 29. The total ammunition used by Americans included 200,000 rounds of 5-inch, 500,000 rounds of 40mm, and 1.2 million rounds of 20mm. Japanese rescue teams managed to recover 59 pilots. Rescued aviators remarked, "It was not combat but mechanical execution." On October 25, 1944, at 0658 off the coast of Samar Island in the Philippines, the quintessential David versus Goliath battle exemplifying the ammunition war was about to start. Admiral Takeo Kurita's Central Force, comprising 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, had caught Taffy 36 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, 4 destroyer escorts completely by surprise. What occurred next surpassed all expectations. Commander Ernest Evans, in charge of destroyer USS Johnston, acted without delay. All crew at general quarters, prepare to engage major Japanese fleet units. Engines at maximum ahead, left rudder to full. Over the subsequent hour, the Johnston would fire more than 200 rounds from her 5.5-inch guns at the heavy cruiser Kamana, achieving 40 hits that destroyed its superstructure. Afterwards, Johnston attacked the battleship Congo, discharging 30 rounds behind a smokescreen. Its crew was not concerned with accuracy, simply directing as much fire as possible. Meanwhile, on the destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland made a crucial call. "We're going in, boys. This is a fight against insurmountable odds. No one can expect to survive." What he omitted was that the ship was equipped with merely 325 rounds per gun, totaling 1,625 rounds. Within 35 minutes, Roberts fired over 600 rounds from a single gun, almost 40% of its total ammunition, so quickly that the barrel glowed white with heat. Paul H. Carr, gunner's mate 3rd class and in charge of Mount 52, managed to keep firing even when the gun lost power. He and his team manually loaded and discharged another 6 shells before a violent explosion. Carr was discovered near death, still holding the last 5-inch round, attempting to load it into the ruined gun. On the Japanese side, the battleship Yamato, recognized as the most formidable warship ever constructed, unleashed her primary artillery in actual combat for the first and only instance against surface targets. Although the specific quantity of shells fired is not absolutely certain, Yamato discharged dozens of her enormous 18.1-inch projectiles. However, her ammunition stores primarily held armor-piercing shells intended for battleship engagements. When used against lightly protected escort carriers, these shells passed through without detonating. Admiral Mate Ugaki, who led Battleship Division 1, recorded in his diary that evening, the enemy destroyers advanced through their own smoke, maintaining continuous fire. The amount of ammunition used on such minor vessels is beyond reckoning. The battle numbers narrate the outcome. American ammunition fired about 20,000 rounds of all types. Japanese ammunition fired about 3,000 rounds of all types. American vessels lost 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, 1 escort carrier. Japanese vessels hit by gunfire, 3 heavy cruisers heavily damaged. Result: the Japanese retreated despite having massive superiority. The reality of industrial production in war. By the end of 1944, American output of ammunition had soared to levels unfathomable to the Japanese. The real magnitude was astonishing. Between 1941 and 1945, the United States manufactured 47 billion rounds of small arms ammo, with 41.4 billion specifically being rifle and pistol rounds. This quantity equaled, as one general observed, 10 shots per person on the planet. Production statistics for November 1944 were as follows. The United States produced 3.5 billion small arms rounds, 1.2 million 5-inch shells, 8 million 40 mm rounds, 20 million 20 mm rounds, 10,000 16-inch shells, 15,000 14-inch shells, 40,000 8-inch shells, and 60,000 6-inch shells. By comparison, Japan's total ammunition output for the entire conflict amounted to approximately 15 million rounds. The script continues in the same manner.